So I'm going to talk first about assessing the Southern Ocean climate variability. And did I plug in this one? And feel free to ask questions if, again, especially if they're just about details. I want this to be fairly clear, and it's not a terribly long talk anyway. But the idea is, I thought about what are the goals for a rigorous quantification of the Southern Ocean climate. And first, we need to account for all relevant measurements, which is a large challenge. When we get those measurements, we want to draw the maximum information content from them. And then we need to quantify our uncertainty. And that's going to be the first half of my talk. And the second half will be about the maximum information content. Lastly, we need to identify gaps in future priorities. Okay, so does this work? All right, so if we have a quantity of interest, say ocean heat content, there's going to be a mean, a predictable part, for example, the seasonal cycle. We will have a trend. That's what we're interested in terms of the climate. If you want, you can make it a polynomial. And we'll also have a residual signal and a measurement error. And then assuming continuous sampling, we have an uncertainty for our slope, for our trend, given by a combination of how long the time record is, that's this delta t, how long what is the natural variability of the system, and what is the decorrelation time of that natural variability. We also have measurement noise and decorrelation time of the measurement noise. For this talk, I'm going to assume that the measurement noise is much smaller than the natural variability. And for most of our measurements, that's true. If it's not the case, then probably we won't be using it to assess the climate. So let's see. So if we want to have a low uncertainty in our trend, we either need a really long time series. We need to observe this for decades. Or we want a very quiet region. There's not much natural variability. Or we could have a very short decorrelation scale. So this is an example of, this was in the IPCC AR4, and it's trend in ocean heat content. Southern Ocean is this purple one. And you might ask, well, how did they come up with these uncertainty estimates? And they did it a different way than I'm presenting here. And the important part is that you do need these uncertainty estimates. This method that I'm playing out here is sketched out well in this paper. So get the details there. Okay, so so we have our uncertainty given by this formula, and there's what I want to talk about here. The colors are really off. We'll just have to live with that. What I want to do is talk about some of the easiest data sets. That would be altimetry and SST because they are continuously sampled. And we'll look at what is the natural variability in the decorrelation timescale. Now, BAMS is special in that they're not asking for a state of the climate so much. They want to know how is this year different from the previous years. And so what I'm showing here is for SSH, this is the trend, and it's about 3 millimeters per year everywhere. And well, there's some unique locations, and we can figure out why they look like that from looking at the uncertainty in the trend. And then this is what BAMS wants to know in the state of the climate. Well, how is 2014 different than the previous years? And that's this plot, and you see that the signal's about 4 centimeters. So we can ask if that's significant. So first, here's the standard deviation of SSH. We see that it's about 8 centimeters everywhere, which says that that's the natural variability. And it says that this plot that's in the state of the climate, where we see about 5 centimeters of difference, that's really expected. That's the natural variability. And so it's more weather than climate. This is not really something that we should be surprised to see. However, this trend, we can still ask, is this trend significant? And that, as I showed in the formula, is the product of the natural variability times the decorrelation timescale. And here I've done the decorrelation timescale in months. We see that most of the place it does decorrelate in about a month, although there are some locations where there's long memory. And I want to point out that all these all these statistics, this comes from after first taking out that seasonal cycle and taking out just the seasonal cycle, that predictable part. So this is what happens when I take the product and I get an uncertainty of about 2 millimeters per year maximum, except for the Agulhas region. Most of the place it's about a centimeter. I mean, sorry, these are millimeters. Most of the place it's less than a millimeter a year, and so that trend is significant. So that is a climate trend that we really do want to be discussing, and how that's changing is something that we can address as well, because we could, considering there's such low uncertainty, we can split it up into different durations. SST, this is the other plot that was in the State of the Climate that shows how SST in 2013 was different than 2002. And you see it's about a degree here, warmer in some places, colder in others. We look at the natural variability, and the natural variability is also about a degree. And so again, this is to be expected that one year will be on average a degree warmer than the previous year. The decorrelation timescale is relatively short, about a month in most places. I was kind of surprised to see this. I'm not sure why the decorrelation timescale is so long there. And then here's just a side note. This is something to be very careful about. When these plots come from a record that north of 40 South starts in 1998, but south of 40 South starts in 2002. This is from microwave mapped SST. And notice you can actually see that line in these plots, which that is a measure of uncertainty as well. So that's just something to be careful about. That shows that our time series is is not truly converged. And this is the uncertainty map and the trend, and it's really low. It's about 0.02 degrees C per year. And so we can start, even though SST is such it's not an integrated value like SSH. It's not maybe as climate relevant in that aspect. It is something that we have well constrained uncertainty on the trend. Okay, so these are the easy ones, the low-hanging fruit, satellite-derived quantities. But there are many EOVs that are vital to assess for climate state. And so we have to figure out how to move this methodology, extend this methodology to inform how uncertain those quantities are. And we can do that through ensemble models. We can estimate the natural variability in models and the decorrelation time in models, validate that where observations are available, and provide maps of uncertainty and trend for things like repeat hydrography. And that's it's also, you can use this to figure out sampling requirements. How many times do we have to go? If we want an uncertainty in our trend of a value of this magnitude, how long do we have to observe, or how often do we have to observe, and what can we do? So that's the first half, and now I'm going to move on and talk about, since altimetry is perhaps altimetry and gravity. So now I want to talk about drawing maximum information content from the measurements. And really what that comes down to is multivariate covariances, understanding how one variable informs another and how one observation can extend. Altimetry record begins in 1992, so it's really probably our best climate record for the Southern Ocean. And so we can use it to inform other records. And so I'm going to show some work done by Uriel and Sarah Gilly. And what they did is they binned Argo into 4x2 by 10 decibar groupings. This shows how many Argo profiles are in that, fall into those bins. And then they carry out a regression of the satellite signal. They use Aviso with the Argo anomalies. So what is theta prime in that box, salt prime in that box, density perturbation in that box, regressed on SSH prime at the surface. What they find is there's not much correlation at the surface. There's just too much going on in the top 200 meters to say much. There's a lot of atmospheric short scales that are changing things. But when you get down to about 1,000 meters, you have a very strong correlation between SSH and the interior density profile. And so you can explain about 50% of the variance in Argo based on altimetry. This is a map showing at 1,000 meters the regression coefficients, and this is density, temperature, and salinity. And you get these funny patterns because it shows where salinity controls density and where temperature controls density. But you get this map of regression coefficients. And then what they do is they can use that to inform how to separate the eddy signal from the mean signal and basically reduce the natural variability in the Argos signal to try to get a better map of the mean and a better map of the eddy variance. And so that comes back to what is the natural variability and can we understand it in this, and we can use other observations to maybe reduce that. We can try to do this for other things too, because there's oxygen will also have a correlation with SSH prime or temperature. All right, moving on is that there's other platforms that we haven't exploited yet. So the gravity recovery and climate experiment, GRACE, provides time variable gravity. It tells us the mass distribution of the Earth. And it's been transformative for glaciologists. There's many, many papers on mass balance of ice sheets and glaciers from GRACE. I picked this one recently, which shows the trend in ice mass in Antarctica over 2003 to 2012, almost the full record. GRACE is still flying. This is the first 4 years, and this is the next 6 years. And you see that the trend has accelerated. So it's been really amazing for many fields. However, we haven't really exploited it as oceanographers yet, the time variable part. It does give us mass distribution, and that yields bottom pressure. It tells us how mass is being redistributed and how the bottom pressure is changing. And if we properly calibrate, we can start to infer an abyssal dynamic ocean topography and estimates of the abyssal circulation. So this is work I've started on. I don't have any strong results here, but just to show you kind of where we're going, GRACE measures bottom pressure in spherical harmonics, but people at, for example, Jet Propulsion Lab in California are working on getting it in lat long space, and they have these mass cons. And so I take the bottom pressure at this location and this location. We know bottom water flows out through here. Here's New Zealand. Bottom water comes up along the Louisville Ridge and along the Chromatic Ridge. And so I take these two, and if you knew the cross-sectional area of Antarctic bottom water, here's the P6 line from the WOS Atlas. Orsi defines bottom water here as being density 28.8. You get a cross-sectional area. And if this Antarctic bottom water moved as a slab with no form drag, no shear, we could get, because it's, assume it's geostrophic, you can get the transport simply by the cross-section area divided by F times this pressure difference. So I've been working to try to correct for the geostrophic flow, shear, and bottom form drag and get a time series of bottom water export through this cross-section. And I'm hoping to have a draft soon. Sorry, I don't have results to show you now. But we have been assessing the uncertainty, and we find the uncertainty is about a sphere drip, while the standard deviation is about 1.5 sphere drips. And so we are able to explain about half the variance of that signal. And given that this is already a 13-year record, we're going to start to, I think we can start to push this forward to understand bottom water export from mass distribution measured in space. So that's what I've put together to talk about today. And again, these are the 4 things that I think we really need to push forward if we want to have a rigorous quantification of the Southern Ocean climate. Thank you. I think I'm way ahead of schedule, too.
Yeah. Now that so does anyone have a quick question for Matt?
Yes?
When you said we need to validate model results where time series are available, more in data, are we expecting models to be able to capture anything more than annual timescales? Are we just talking about decadal?
No, I'm talking about the scales of the natural variability. So the correlation scales. So one can think of, we have a hydrographic section, say the P6 line, and you can measure spatial decorrelation scales on that. Or you have a mooring and you can measure temporal decorrelation scales from that. From those point measurements, how different is the model, how basically coarsened is the model. And use that to then use the model then to spread that context to figure out what are the measurement requirements to estimate the uncertainty and the trends.
Thanks, Matt. Does anyone else have another question? Steve.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Steve, we'd need to use the microphone for the webcast, if that's all right.
I was wondering if you think there's any potential in using spatial decorrelation scales as well to, if the noise in
Yes.
quotes is eddies, then if it's basin scale, then it's not eddies. And so is there a signal there that we can exploit as well?
Yeah, so I've only touched on temporal decorrelation, and right tomorrow I have a talk where I only touch on spatial decorrelation. Yeah, I think there's really no reason why you wouldn't want to do both, except the dimensionality of the problem and the presentation gets much more complicated. But I agree that if we if we understand all these scales, then we can really beat down the uncertainty.
Thanks, Matt.